Hello, my name is Marina Hajek, and we are about to show you a trajectory of my new and past work. We have here my first piece that I made in 1989, and this is called A Portrait of Imperialism. It's made out of clay and painted with acrylic paint. As you can see, there is this African woman holding a brassiere. To me is that, like in Guatemala, I experienced that some religious communities, religious leaders would come to the indigenous community and try to change their approach to life, their ideologies, how they are trying to impose onto another culture and change them. I found this image to be so representative about that, to be so representative of the theme that I want to express myself in the piece. Now we move to the screen. This is a bronze piece, cast bronze, mounted on a wooden base. And this piece represents the struggle and the fight of people who are always fighting for justice, fighting for human rights. In Guatemala, there were so many people who were tortured and killed during the Civil War. While I was growing up, I was a teenager then, and I saw the result of it. We would wake up in the morning, read it in the newspapers that some students from the University of San Carlos had been killed, found on the streets, their bodies found on the street, just because they spoke out their opinion about the government. That also made an impression on myself, and felt that I needed to represent it, to show the world that that was happening in Guatemala. At the time that it was happening, my mother was so concerned that me as an art student, I was going to be talking about these subjects or topics with other students, and being in a place that we could be heard by people that used to be called orejas, ears. These people were people who were listening to what other people were talking about and taking care to catch anyone, let's say an enemy of the government, that could be a potential communist or, yes, somebody fighting for the rights of the people and not putting the government down. So my mother was always concerned about me getting in danger. But in reality, there were so many people in danger, and as I said, many days we heard about so many people getting killed just because speaking out their opinion. And then many of them were tortured. Torture is a way to stop you from fighting, from speaking out about your ideals. They want to leave you in a mental and physical state in which they stop your fight for your ideals, as I said before. But we all know that there will always be someone else continuing that fight, continuing the scream for justice. So this is what this piece represents. Now, this piece is also cast bronze and brass. I work in a series of pieces about the Maya culture. I am an admirer of the Maya culture in Guatemala that took place in Guatemala, Mexico, and South America. They spread mainly from Guatemala to northern Mexico. These represent the philosophy of the Mayans about creation. They believe they were created from maize, from nature. So here is the shape, the body of a woman emerging from the corn cob. This is a series of crosses that this is a work that I made when I was in the United States, when I was a student of art at the University of Birmingham, Alabama. And especially this one, when I came to the United States and I was learning about the American culture and God, their faith in God, how would they represent it, how would they manifest. Then I see written on the dollar bills, on the currency, in God we trust. And I was thinking, why do you have to write in God we trust or manifest something about God in currency? This is, if you talk about religion, if you talk about religion or spirituality, you don't relate it with money. This is something deep in you. It's like a philosophy, an understanding of spiritual power. So these pieces represent that I came to understand here in the United States that really what it means for the American people is that we tenuously cling to spirituality, but that is all but obliterated by the tempting glow of materialism. You may ask yourselves, why did I just place the hands and feet? And the reason is that because a so-called spiritual nation, to me, they are more attracted to the goal than the spiritual aspect of the cross. Hands and feet are still on the cross because they were nailed to it. But to me, what the body of Christ represented, the spiritual aspect of the cross, it's gone. It's fallen in pieces. So that's why what is left are just the feet and hands, because they were nailed to it. You may tell yourself that I am wrong, that not everyone is like that. I know that not everyone is like that. But just think about it. If you say, I am a spiritual, I go to church, I involve in the community, I am very involved in the community, I do my good deeds. But if you support the ones to oppress others, if you support the ones who cause violence, discrimination, aggression, oppression against others and the poor, you are part of it. If you don't stand against it, you are part of it. We are all sinners if we stand that. We are hiding. That's why the other cross on the right, the blind faith. We want to be spiritual as long as it does not conflict with our desires of comfort and materialism. So we have to re-examine ourselves if we want to be true religious people. And then we have this cross on the right that is cast iron on the gold leaf wooden cross. And then this one also, we want to be spiritual as long as it doesn't conflict without our desires of materialism, comfort and materialism. And this other one on the left is from the same series, but this one also, are we really spiritual people? And I have to say that these impressions, I got them mainly because of the government, how the United States government works, and how they use religion to manipulate the masses. We dress the crosses in gold, and we look at the golden, we are being blinded by the golden cross. This one here, this cross on the left, is because Jesus Christ supposedly was crucified on a wooden cross, not a golden cross. So you see the eyes inside the cross. Because yes, we want to say it is this or that way, but we know that the reality is another one. So, yeah, this is talking about religion. And this other piece that we have here on the left, this other piece that we have on the left is from the series that I made, the other piece from the Maya culture, addressing the subject of the Maya culture, where we saw creation. This is mother corn. Again, thinking about the philosophy, the idea of being created from corn, from the Mayan point of view. I call it mother corn, and I identify it as a female figure, because also women are the ones in the Mayan society that hold the family together. You can see this represents corn stalk, and is the three supports are the shape of, or are corn cobs that are supporting the world. Maize was and is still very important for the Maya culture, but also became to be very important for many other cultures around the world. It got to support many other cultures in the world. That's why it's carrying the world. And now we move to sacrificial altar. This piece is very special to me too. Is one, I would say this was the third piece that I made at the university when I was a student at the University of Birmingham, Alabama. That was in the late 1980s to beginning of 1990s. I did this piece in clay when I was a student. This one is cast bronze. This one represents, and as I said, the title is Sacrificial Altar, but it represents to me, and I'm trying to educate others, that human sacrifice still is taking place today. If we think about the Maya culture, that they practice human sacrifices, if we think that the Mayan culture practiced human sacrifices in the past, they were still practicing that during the civil war in Guatemala. And why I'm saying this is because the army in those days were forcing the natives to join the army, turning them against their own people. And then the soldiers found themselves killing their own people for other people's ideas. So if we get closer, you can see that the face doesn't have eyes, but the eyelids suggest that it does. And why I chose this is because on one of my travelings in Guatemala by bus, I'm talking to you about the 1970s, we came to a checkpoint by the army. So I stayed in the bus. Some people came out of the bus and the army was checking documents. As they were checking documents outside the bus, I was looking at one of the soldiers with a machine gun, standing vigil. And I just could not find his soul. His facial expression was soulless. I thought, this man is capable of killing anything, anyone, and probably feel nothing. And it just went through my head, the thoughts of all the process that the natives who were forced to join the army went through. And that's why it's this soulless expression. Because at the time that many people were forced to join the army, if they rebelled against the army and they didn't want to be there, they would be tortured, they would be beaten. And so it was like join or be killed. And nobody would say anything about it. At those times, there was no human rights in Guatemala that I remember of when I was a teenager. There was not a commission of human rights. So then it has the three supports that are shaping a bullet because of the bullets coming from the machine guns. And this design, I use this design because my grandfather was an archaeologist, Antonio Tejeda, and I remember that in one of his excavations, he found sacrificial altar. It was a small sacrificial altar, maybe this big, but it was not for humans. It was for animals, because the Mayans used to offer the soul of the animal to the gods, and they will keep the flesh. And the way they did it was, as the altar that my grandfather found was cylindrical with three supports, and he had told me that the three supports supposed to go upwards, holding a plate that had a little perforation in the middle. And what they did, because the top of the cylindrical piece was concave, they would build a little fire in there and put the plate on the three supports. And when they were hunting, they would sacrifice the animal to the gods in a way that they would drip blood on top of the plate and will drip from the center into the fire. The fire burning the blood would carry the soul to the gods. And that was the offering. So I took the same design, but I added these elements that I observed in other decoration from ceramic found around Lake Amatitlan. That was a different area from where my grandfather found the sacrificial altar. This collection lets hear the voices, portraits of immigrants in the United States, and letters addressed to all of us about their stories, These pieces were made with recycled paper. I recycle paper in order to make paper pulp, my own paper pulp, and then I model the portraits of the participants who wanted to have the chance to have their voices heard. I model their portrait in clay on a flat background. Once I have that, I make a plaster mold. From that plaster mold, I press on the paper pulp that I made. And I have to let it dry for a long time. Then, once it's dry, I mount it on this board that I painted black. It has a foam board on the back, so you can tell that the piece is kind of floating on the wooden board. Then I copy the letter of the participant onto this surface. So I wanted to give the opportunity to immigrants to have their voices heard. We also need to hear the other side of the story. And the most accurate story, if you come to think, if we care about that person, that immigrant, not just as a general term, but as individuals, and who are they? Do we care about that? Do we want to learn why they came here? What was the reason that pushed them to leave everything behind and take the risk to come here and document it? So this is it. I want you to look at them, to read, to learn and connect. We have Roberto, who had traveled the world looking for better chance at life, looking for opportunities. We have his wife, Catalina, following the same dream, knowing that in their own countries, they wouldn't get the opportunity that they dream of. We also have Eloise and Pedro, the same thing, looking for a better future for their children. These people, all immigrants, no matter where you come from, they want to work hard because they want to provide a better future for their children. They hold 2, 3 jobs, but they don't care because they know that their children will have better opportunities in life than what they did when they were their age, when they were young. The effect on the immigrant when leaving their native country can be very emotional, especially when you are a child. And if you think about the dreamers, they didn't ask to come here, but their parents thought that they deserved better than what they would be able to give them if they stay in their country of origin. But the effect on the child can be psychological, emotional, but they adapt a lot. But if you then years later have a government that is so much against the understanding of why people leave the native countries and make it even more difficult, it's an obstacle. They create obstacles for these other people, like the dreamers, to go on a life. They want to have a productive life. They want to have opportunities. And we all deserve that. We are all immigrants. We move around. We move to where there are better opportunities. That's a natural instinct. but we as human beings have created barriers. And some others want to build these physical walls to stop the natural sense of immigration. And we have Marta. She belonged to an indigenous community in Guatemala from the area of El Quiché. I met her on the streets of Guatemala when I was living there. She was selling silver charms on the streets, wearing still her traditional indigenous dress representative of the area where she was coming from. And we became friends after a year or so of knowing her. And I heard her story. When I learned of her story, again, I thought that I feel like I need to do something. I cannot just leave it as it is. I cannot just be silent. Her father was killed during the Civil War. He went to work one day and never came back. Marta was the oldest of 4 children, and she found herself at the age of 17 being in charge of the family, having to support the family. A year later, her mother died of stomach cancer. And at the same time that this was going on, the army had been there in their village for some time already. And that's when people started to disappear. When I met her, she was already living in the city because she took the decision to leave the village because she couldn't find any job there. Uneducated and female, those were factors that made it impossible for her to find a job that she could support her family with. So she took the decision to move to the city. But as I said, by just selling silver charms was not enough, and uneducated, she couldn't also make it in the city. She also wanted to have a better opportunity, a better chance in life for her and her family. One day she asked me if I could go with her to her village to leave flowers to her mother's tomb. The reason she wanted me to go with her was because I'm not indigenous, and she thought that she felt protected, that by me going with her, the army wouldn't stop us, and she would be able to leave flowers on her mother's tomb. When we got to the village, well, obviously I agreed to go with her, and when we got to the village, the village was desolated, and I could see bullets on the wall of the houses. People there started disappearing, and one of the reasons was that they were accused of being guerrillas or communists. The only reason for the villagers to gather was to think about the ways they could improve the lifestyle of their community and members of the community. They were not communists, they just wanted a better life. But if you gather at night after working hours, the army would see that as something suspicious. And many of them were accused of being communists or guerrillas. But that was not the reason they were together. They just gathered together in order to plan a better future. They just gathered together to think about the ways they could improve the living situation of the villagers. So, yes, I went with her to her village, and I saw what was left after the army had occupied that area a few years earlier. After a few years of living in Guatemala, Marta decided to go to the United States and took that difficult decision because left her family behind. but she wasn't also making it in the city. As I said, if you don't have an education and you are female in those days, and still does, it's very difficult for a woman to find a job that would support the family. They just wanted education. She tells me one day, why is the army here? Why is the army in our village? We don't need machine guns. We don't need the army. We just need schools. Give us a way, give us the tools to get ahead in life. We work hard, and they do work hard. They will take any job because they know that that means survival. And that has been the reality in the past in Guatemala about survival, and it is also in many other countries in the world, as we know. And we just have to stand for justice, for what it is right, and not to oppress the poor, not to think that the third world countries are going to be the modern day slaves, as they are. So we need to scream for justice. So thank you.